You're not behind, you're being lied to. And your brain keeps believing it every single time you open Instagram. You wake up and the first thought isn't about what you want to do today. It's the calculation. That instant mental math, how old am I, what have I accomplished, where should I be by now? You're doing comparative analysis before you even brush your teeth. This isn't motivation. This is a diagnostic criterion for generalized anxiety, and you're running it as your operating system. The technical term is temporal comparison bias, and it's hijacking your prefrontal cortex every morning before you're conscious enough to stop it. You're not lazy. Line number 1 is the timeline illusion. Your brain has constructed a detailed schedule of when things should happen: career milestones by 25, relationship status by 27, financial stability by 30. You didn't sit down and write this schedule. Nobody handed you a syllabus, but it's there, precise and punishing, cross-referencing your actual life against it every single day. Here's what's actually happening. You're experiencing what psychologists call the tyranny of the implicit norm. These aren't your goals. You see someone's promotion announcement on LinkedIn, someone else's engagement photos on Instagram, another person's apartment tour on TikTok. Your brain doesn't process these as random data points. It processes them as evidence that you're falling behind schedule. But here's the mechanism you're missing. You're experiencing sampling bias on an industrial scale. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes footage to everyone else's highlight reel, and your brain is treating that contaminated data set as reality. You're not behind. I spent 14 months believing I was catastrophically behind because I hadn't started a business by 24. 14 months. I can timestamp when it started, seeing a Forbes 30 under 30 article about someone my age who'd raised venture capital. I didn't even want to start a business. I liked my job. But that article installed a belief system in under 3 minutes that took over a year to dismantle. That's how fast this happens. The timeline illusion works because your brain confuses what's visible with what's statistically normal. When you see someone's success at 26, your brain doesn't think that's one person's outcome. It thinks that's the standard for 26. This is availability heuristic meeting confirmation bias. The successes are loud and visible, so they feel common. The struggles are private and hidden, so they feel rare. You think you're the exception struggling in a world of people who have it figured out. Line number 2 is the linear progression myth. You think development is supposed to be a straight line. Each year you should be more successful, more stable, more figured out than the last. When that doesn't happen, when you have a setback or a lateral move or a year that feels stagnant, you interpret it as failure. You're regressing, you're wasting time, but human development has never been linear. The research shows it's cyclical, recursive, full of plateaus and setbacks that are part of the process, not deviations from it. Your brain is hardwired to recognize patterns and create narratives. When your life doesn't match the pattern you expected, your brain doesn't question the pattern, it questions you. This is fundamental attribution error in action. When things don't go as planned, you blame your character rather than circumstances. You're not disciplined enough, you're not ambitious enough, you're not good enough. But the pattern itself is the problem. It's based on an industrial-era model of human development that assumed stability, predictability, and linear career paths. That world doesn't exist anymore. When I finally asked my therapist why I felt so behind despite objectively doing fine, she said something that rewired my brain: "You're mourning a future that was never real." I was grieving the timeline I expected my life to follow, the apartment I thought I'd have, the salary I thought I'd be making, the confidence I thought I'd feel. None of those things were goals I'd consciously chosen. They were ambient expectations that calcified into requirements. I wasn't behind. I was mourning the death of a hallucination. The linear progression myth makes you interpret every plateau as a problem. You worked hard for 2 years and you're still at the same level, so something must be wrong with you. But plateau periods are where integration happens. They're not wasted time. They're when your brain consolidates what you've learned and builds the foundation for the next growth phase. There's a term in skill acquisition research called the consolidation plateau. It's a necessary part of development where visible progress stops, but internal development continues. You're not stuck. The timeline you're comparing yourself to never existed. It's a statistical ghost you're racing against in your head. Line number 3 is the visibility fallacy. You believe that if something matters, it should be visible. If you're growing, there should be external proof: a promotion, a relationship milestone, a measurable achievement. When your growth is internal, when you're developing emotional regulation or building self-awareness or learning to set boundaries, it doesn't count because you can't screenshot it. This is the metric fixation trap. You're dismissing the most important development because it doesn't have a social media announcement format. Here's the twist that breaks the whole system. The people you think are ahead are running the same calculation you are. They're looking at someone else's life and feeling behind. That person you envy for having their career figured out is watching someone else's relationship and feeling inadequate. The person whose relationship you envy is looking at someone else's freedom and feeling trapped. Everyone is behind in the game they're not playing. You're all comparing your weakness to someone else's strength and calling it a comprehensive life assessment. The visibility fallacy makes you discount everything that can't be measured. You spent 6 months learning to manage your anxiety better. That doesn't show up on LinkedIn, so it feels less real than someone else's job title change. You ended a relationship that wasn't right instead of staying because of sunk cost. That doesn't have a congratulations template, so it feels like failure instead of growth. You're developing discernment, emotional intelligence, self-knowledge. These are the skills that determine life satisfaction in longitudinal studies. After that therapy session, I started tracking something different, not achievements, not milestones. I started noticing when I didn't spiral into anxiety after a setback, when I set a boundary without apologizing, when I felt uncertain about the future and didn't interpret it as personal failure. These moments didn't have announcement formats. Nobody was congratulating me. But I was building a different operating system, one that didn't require external validation to confirm I was on track. Your 20s aren't a race with a finish line. They're a laboratory. You're running experiments, this job, that city, this relationship structure, that boundary. Some experiments yield results you want, some don't. Both outcomes are data, not verdicts on your worth. When you're comparing your experimental phase to someone else's highlight reel, you're comparing categorically different things. They're showing you their conclusion slide, you're still in the methodology section. That's not being behind. That's being in a different part of the process. The shift isn't about achieving more so you can finally feel adequate. That's the same trap with different bait. The shift is recognizing that the timeline you're measuring against is a construct and you're allowed to deconstruct it. You're allowed to want different things than the pattern suggests. You're allowed to move at a different pace. You're allowed to prioritize internal development over external metrics. You're allowed to be 27 and still figuring it out, 31 and changing direction, 24 and choosing rest over optimization. There's a specific moment when this clicks and it's not what you expect. It's not when you finally achieve the milestone you thought would make you feel adequate. It's quieter. It's when you're doing something ordinary, making coffee or commuting or folding laundry, and you realize the constant background calculation has stopped running. You're just here doing this without measuring it against where you should be. That moment won't make sense to screenshot. It won't fit in a caption. But it's the actual finish line. Not achievement, not arrivals. So what do you do with this information? You start by naming the thoughts when they appear. That's temporal comparison bias. That's availability heuristic. That's the visibility fallacy. When you name the cognitive distortion, you create distance from it. It's still there, but it's no longer you. It's a thought pattern you're observing, not truth you're drowning in. You start asking different questions. You're not behind, you're operating with contaminated data, comparing yourself to statistical ghosts and measuring your worth against a timeline that was never designed for human complexity. The anxiety is real, the feeling is valid, but the premise is false. Your 20s are supposed to feel uncertain. Development is supposed to be nonlinear. Growth is supposed to include invisible phases. You're not the exception who's failing. You're the majority who's been convinced that normal development is personal inadequacy. Stop asking if you're behind. Start asking who convinced you there was a schedule in the first place. If the video resonated with you, hit subscribe. Uncomfortable Truths releases new videos every day on personal finance, relationships, mindset, and productivity, and more. Turn on notifications so you never miss one. The truth is uncomfortable, but it's always worth it.